Ah. Hey. Okay, where am I at? Where am I at? What has been going on? How are you? Can't hear you. I'm going to assume you're well. I hope you're well, at least. All right, so this is update, I don't know, number 20 or something. And probably a little longer today, at least longer than last week, because I'm trying to preemptively do this recording before I dig into the work today. So, Power Nerd, Moth, Axolotl, Ruby Quaker. 2 days ago, I tracked the bass, so the drums were done the week or two prior, and then we went about doing the editing. The writing of the material for the Power Nerd record was done over the course of 12 days, and therefore there was a lot of arrangement modifications that needed to be done post the studio. We had 3 days to track the drums, and whilst tracking, I was making mental notes of, okay, that section is loose, that section needs some thought, or that section needs some work, or maybe we need to double that, or maybe that part there that's currently doubled needs to be just a single, things like that. But the way that I tend to work after the amount of records that I've made is very sequential, so I need to complete one task before I move on to the rest. In the case of a project like The Moth, which has more leeway in terms of the structure, and by that I mean with Moth, the structures of those pieces of music don't need to be, or at least don't benefit as much from being as traditional as what seems to work with the Power Nerd record. And the reason I think I am looking or sounding not confused, but whatever this is because with the Power Nerd record I find that the ironic thing that I've struggled with is the fact that it's as simple as it is. You know, I've got a long history of complicating things, as is probably clear, and as I've discussed over the course of these last few updates. And as had happened in the past, when I would work on material over and over, I would get tired of it and then modify it, and then things would get more complicated, and then it would hold my interest enough to work through it. But with this record, what I found is it works really well if it's simple. And because it's happened so quickly, the thought process has been throughout it thinking, how can this work actually? It doesn't work. And then when I open it up, I'm like, oh yeah, it totally does. And because the nature of these updates is to share the process, at the risk of sounding completely insecure, I'll just vomit what goes on in my head in terms of this. I think because of the disparate nature of the music that I've worked on in the past over the course of all these records, some of it's really heavy, some of it's very melodic, some of it's ethereal, some of it's quasi-spiritual, some of it is super abstract. What goes on in my head is this thought that you need to please everybody. And please understand that when I say that, it's not that I necessarily feel that intrinsically. It's just, you have these neurotic thoughts that plague you as a creator. And one of which, while I've been working on this, is, well, because it's so steeped in one direction, And because I like the direction, and because the way that it's taken shape has been so quick, what I would do in the past, I suppose, is preemptively make apologies for it. Like say, and I guess even by verbalizing this, I'm doing the same thing, but to say, oh, well, the moth is very complicated, or axolotl's very abstract, or Ruby Quaker is creative in a very, science fiction type way. So therefore, when you hear this record, take it for what it is. That's kind of what I would say in the past. And again, just because I'm verbalizing it, I'm not actually saying that this time. And what happens is every time I open up the sessions, I'm like, oh, that's really fucking cool. And a big part of the process has been remembering. It's almost like these 3 records act as a swan song for me in some way. Not in terms of my output creatively, but more like it caps off an entire era. It caps off 30 years of work in a way. And so these 3 records and the TV show, I'm sorry, I'm flitting all over the place, but that's just the nature of it right now. These 3 records it's like, I can't help but feel like after this, it's all going to change for me. I don't mean in a professional sense, and I don't mean, like I'm going to die or anything. It's more just like, I feel like these 3 cap off something, and then after this, I'm going to do something else. What that is, I'm not sure. I have no idea. But that's really the sense that pervades this entire process, is this is the end of a very definite era in my life. And so going back to Power Nerd, when I listen to it, I'm like, well, that's what it needs to be, and I love it. I love it because as much as I guess since I was younger, wanted to impress and prove that musically I've got a lot of things going on that I think are rooted in more avant-garde types of expression. And I think as musicians as well, we want to prove our worth on a theoretical level, at least some of us. And so I want to say, oh, I love Stravinsky, or I love progressive music, or I love complicated thrash metal, or I love odd abstract sounds. But what I'd forgotten is it all started with Motorhead and AC/DC. I just loved it. It was just the thing that really got me into music was Motorhead at Brixton and Highway to Hell, and I loved that Live Fear record. I just love that kind of stripped back and direct statement. And so Power Nerd became this expression of that I think I had forgotten was such a huge part of my formative years. And so anytime I try and do anything with this record that isn't that, it just sounds stupid. But when I go back to that, it's like, yeah, don't complicate that pattern. Don't add some, oddly voiced arpeggio to that chord. It's like that's not what makes that part of your musical nature tick. And as such, is something that I don't think I've ever experimented with before. But also, I realize how much I'm like, oh yeah, I know how to do that. And I remember, I think the thing that really was insightful to me by working on this stuff is I loved, when I say this, it seems like a lot of people say this next statement as some sort of badge of honor because it makes them sound one way or another, but I legitimately mean it. I loved the punk stuff when I was a kid. I love the energy of it. I love the humor of it. I love the I don't care-ness of it. And I love the fact that the technical aspects of it weren't as important as the momentum and the attitude and all these sorts of things. And I remember when I first started being labeled as like, oh, you're a progressive musician. I'm like, I guess I'm a progressive musician now. And then touring with a lot of progressive bands, I was taken back by how many of those musicians never liked that music. They were like, oh, I didn't like it. They didn't know how to play or something. And I'm thinking, that's crazy. And I think that maybe there was the separation for me with a lot of those bands that were really clean and really, the prowess and, having it up high even. And I was thinking, why don't I relate to this? And I think it's the lack of that, it could self-destruct at any moment, that went along with that sort of stuff. In Vancouver, there was a couple bands that we used to see all the time, and we just loved it, like No Means No, because they were almost like punk prog in a way. It was like, I like the sound of music that's complicated in a way, but it doesn't sound like it's easy for the players. It's like they're working at their max capacity in order to pull off these licks. And I always related to that. Maybe it's because I saw it around town so much as a kid, or Dayglow Abortions or SNFU, or all these bands that were part of the scene in Vancouver. It was fun, and it was, you never know what was going to happen, and I loved that. And I think my attraction to that started with Motorhead. And so working on the Power Nerd record, I realized that this is much more what it needs to be resonating with than this perceived sense of cleverness that has been adopted over the past however many years. And maybe in the beginning it was adopted because I wanted to appear like I was competing with things that I made the assumption were clever, or more clever than I, or whatever insecurity that is rooted in. And to be fair, over the years that became a part of my work as well, and legitimately so. Like, I'm like, oh, okay, I understand that type of music, I understand that type of thinking, and so now I have an appreciation for it and a proclivity for it that makes it legitimate. But it wasn't always that way, I guess. And that's not to say the entire record is like that. There's a couple songs that are like that, that are up-tempo and got that sort of a vibe. But a lot of the rest of the material on the Power Nerd stuff is, like I'd said in some of the prior updates, rooted in things that are more like Epicloud or Addicted or that sort of mid-tempo emotional sort of thing. And what I found over the course of this week, because now I can only focus on the Power Nerd stuff, I have 2 weeks to finish this. I mean, I tracked bass over the course of 2 days, 2 days ago, and I chose to track the bass in a separate location because I was waffling about it. I was second-guessing tones, I was second-guessing performances, and I figured that what has worked for me in the past is hard deadlines that I impose on myself, because by doing that, it's done. And if something carries on further, so to track a song with bass, because I love playing the bass so much, to have somebody there that I can bounce off the vibe from, like an engineer that's adept and good, and have all the gear that is meant for that one thing relegated to a 2-day period, it not only forces me to commit, but also if I keep the amounts of days that I choose to do any of these particular parts of the recording to be short, then the ideas seem to, for this project, be very clear. If I have no time and if I have a deadline, then I'm like, oh, of course it's that. But with bass, it was funny because I was like, oh, I'll just do it at my place. And then it went on for a week and I got nothing done. Like I was thinking, oh, maybe it should be this, maybe, and then I changed the arrangement to, and then all of a sudden the song goes to shit, and then I think, oh, this record it doesn't make any sense. And then I pull it back to what it was, and then I'm like, oh, it is that original arrangement. It is that one that is like a typical arrangement. Intro, verse, pre-chorus, chorus, verse, pre-chorus, chorus, bridge, double chorus, whatever. And I think I had adopted this mindset over the past however many years of thinking that, well, that can't work. It's too pedestrian. It's too this and that, and clever music doesn't do that. It throws some sort of wrench into the works. But then I got the bass done, and part of doing the bass is when I was sitting in there and I had no time to second guess it, I'd press play and I'd listen back, and immediately I'd be like, why did I add that? Why did I do that in the bridge? It's like, it doesn't make any sense. And the reason it didn't make any sense is because it's the momentum of it. So, as I think I've discussed in some of the past updates, so much of what it is that you're trying to achieve, or what I'm trying to achieve with each project, is to create a vibe. And if you can establish that vibe through the aesthetics of it and through the lyrics and the fonts and the color scheme and the palette and the tones and all these things, if you can establish that in a way that you understand what it is intrinsically that this record is meant to be, then you can create a vibe that when someone listens to that record, they can depend on it for that. But the hardest thing, because so much of it is based on intuition, and intuition comes slowly. You have to solve things as a result of doing the work within yourself. At least, obviously, this is what I feel. Obviously, everybody's different. But part of it for me is establishing the aesthetic and establishing the vibe can only happen if you are true to what it is that your intuition is based on. And then unearthing whatever that is the process. And I realized by doing this record that so much of unearthing that comes down to facing certain fears or hang-ups that are next in line. So the thing that I've found thus far, and I've only got 2 weeks to finish this thing. It's crazy, and then I'm sending it to mix. But there's so many things to talk about. Sorry. As it's getting closer, I recognize that what this record requires and the vibe that we're looking for is the momentum of it. So it's a relentlessness to it that when you're driving or when you're participating in it, it's like bam, 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 bam. And it keeps that momentum up so that when you put it on, it's like it raises you, it like raises the blood pressure, and you're able to like dig in, and it's like, it's got a muscular sort of dirt bike thing about it. That I used to love dirt bikes before I started playing guitar. I thought I was gonna be motocross dirt bike rider until I screwed my back up by going over a jump in my stupid motorbike. But it's like, where was I? I didn't remember that. I didn't remember how much dirt bikes meant to me. I didn't remember how much Motorhead meant to me. I didn't remember how much I loved the Bon Scott era AC/DC. And it's like you put it out of your mind, and then when all of a sudden there's obstacles in your life that force you to contend with where you're at, and we all have that, certain things become clear. And so the vibe of Power Nerd is meant to have that momentum. Now also, there's 2 more things that I'll talk about today. So for the mix for this, it goes in to be mixed on May 1st. So I have to have it done by May 1st, everything. everything. And I just finished bass and drums and guitar. I did guitar last week too. The keyboards I'm just in the midst of that and just working on the background vocals, and then all next week I start doing vocals, and then it's done, and I have to deliver it to the person who's going to mix it on May 1st, because I start with Steve on the Moth May 21st. And so in order for this record to come out this year, which in order for me to have some business things come together in a proper way, it had to happen. It had to happen. I had to have it finished by the end of May, or else I wouldn't have been able to support myself financially with some of these business opportunities that were contingent on me releasing this Power Nerd record this year. Without touring, I needed to make it all happen, right? So who is mixing it with me is my buddy Stanley, who did live sound for me for a few years. But he's also, he's just one of the most fantastic live sound people I've ever seen. If you've seen Megadeth over the past year, or when Judas wasn't with Meshuggah, he did Meshuggah for a while, and he just makes rooms sound so heavy. Like it's like unlike anybody. But because my vision is so specific for the work, I can't just hand over a mix to somebody and be like, here, go for it, because the nuances of it with the time that I've got, no one knows what it is that you want. So what I'm doing is I'm mixing it as I go, but I'm trying to do it in ways that I've never done it before, so that I've got a single plug-in on each channel. Typically when you're mixing, or at least when I'm mixing, I'll have, like 3 or 4 different plugins on each thing, and these forensic EQs that go into the specifics of the overtones of cymbals and blah, 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 and you multi-band compression, so that when the bass is doing one thing and the kick is doing another thing, you can suppress a certain frequency that's interrupting with the tempo, blah, 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 all that sort of stuff. But because this is like, straightforward stuff, what I chose to do is take the session, commit the tracks, so that if I've got vocals, I commit them, but I build the harmonies so that they're baked in, so that when somebody else mixes it, they don't have to think about the relative levels. It's like, that's where the harmonies, that's how they sit. And then with guitar, I'm like, you get 2 heavy guitars, you sometimes maybe have 2 acoustics, you have 2 clean guitars, maybe you put an echo guitar in the chorus, you can have some keypads in the chorus, drum kit is like straight up. And then if I mix it in a session that I commit all the tracks and then only have one plug-in, that I can then make that session sound like how I feel the mix should sound, then I hand it to somebody who does live sound and say, okay, there it is. Make that you can crank it. Because what I'm good at as a mixer is, again, the real scientific stuff, like the forensic type of mixing thing. And I spend months and months on minute moves and referencing at headphones and back and forth. But what I'm not admittedly as good at is making just a big, heavy, kick-ass rock/metal mix. It's just never been... I just think of it as like more of this science thing. And that's not what this record is. So I chose to have somebody that does live sound sort of finesse the mix and then do all the things with the low end and the kick and all that to make that really like powerful. And then when I'm recording, I've made concerted efforts to keep it straight up, so that when somebody is mixing it, they don't have to say, well, what do you got here? There's 75 keyboards and there's 25 guitars and there's like... And will it work? I mean, this is how I feel about that question I ask myself when I have had moments of fear with this record, when I think, oh, it's too simple, it's too basic, it's too this, that, and the other thing. There's a part of me that goes, the foundation of this particular period of your work is that of intuition. And if you sit with your intuition and ask what you feel, what comes back to me is, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. It's great. It's exactly what it needs to be. Just get the work done. Focus on that. Take care of your health. Go to bed early if you need. Get some sleep. Eat properly. Don't worry about it, dude. It's going to be great. And so that's what I've been rolling on. And that intuition is like, this is what needs to happen. This is what we need to do with the bass. This is what we need to do with the drums. This is what we need to do with the mix. This is what we need to do with the mastering. This is what we need to do with the art. And don't second guess it. As soon as you have that thought, just fire off the email that goes in the direction of that particular component of the project. Okay, so the last thing that I'll talk about today is lyrics. So, I've been postponing it. Not that I've been postponing it really, because it's just, there's not a lot of time to do it regardless. And I do have to have, in my mind, everything completed that needs to be completed prior to the vocals so that I can get that out of my head. I don't have to think about the editing of the drums or the guitar or the keyboards or bass or mix. Or I want all that done so that when I focus on the vocals, which is in 2 days, I start on Monday, then I can have a free and clear path to just get into what it is that the intuition for this particular project is compelling me to say. And the fear gets into that as well right now, because I think, I don't know. But there's another part of me that's like, you do know. You absolutely know. And I'm like, well, what is it then? And I think what is difficult about it so far is when I go to sing, and it's obviously not just me. There's a lot of people I feel that are going through something similar like this. Everything just makes me cry lately, and not like 22-year-old. I remember a buddy of mine, Nick, said to me at one time, he says, when you cry when you're 50, it's a lot different than when you're 18. Like when you're 18, you're like, and you cry and lasts a long time. When you're 50, or 52 now, you're just sitting there and everything's fine. All of a sudden you're just like, and it's over. And it's not like an actual, like you're crying. It's like this, the pressure of everything, this aside, but just life has been so, there's no breaks anymore, right? Like it's like one thing after another all the time in the world, in our personal lives. It's just like bam, bam, bam. There's no time to really like recover from it. And so the emotions are so raw that you see a TV commercial and you just like, and it's like sneaks up on you. And so when I've been singing, I've been putting placeholder vocals down. I haven't wanted to commit to the verse yet, because if I commit lyrics to something, it gets kind of burnt into my head, and then it's hard for me to change it. So I try to be purposely obscure with it, because the syntax and the way that the words fall on a riff, it can just burn itself in so that you can't hear anything other than that, and that's always been a problem. But so I haven't really committed to the verses or anything yet. But even with the choruses, and I don't know what the songs are about yet. I'm sure I do know on some level, but I don't know yet because I haven't allowed that door to open completely yet. But I'll be singing the chorus and I can't get through the chorus. It just like busts me up, and I don't know why. It's not even that the words are about anything. It's so far. It's just that the energy and the momentum that this project has as its foundation triggers something that I'm not used to. And I think what has typically happened as a result of this is it's made me recognize how much I've suppressed over the past however many years, for practical reasons, like to be a father, to be a businessman, to navigate the energy of touring or family or any of these things. you feel things, but you have to make sure that you show up for the things that you are required to show up for as an adult, to the point that a lot of those feelings get kind of pushed. And so starting the vocals, I'm like, fuck, man, like, why is this so heavy? I don't even know what it's about. I don't even know. And again, that intuitive part of me goes, yeah, you know what it's about. And when the time comes for you to sing, you've just got to dig into it. You've got to get through that. You got to break through that emotional wall and really say what it is that you need to say. And what was I just going to say? I had a thought there. It was fleeting, but it was important to what I'm speaking about here. It's like that's what it was, right? What happens when I jot down lyrics? A placeholder lyric for a chorus, like I just want to hear something so I know melodically what to expect when I dig into the vocals. A lot of the times your first thought for a lyrical line, to make it easier to participate with while you're writing, is not of any real emotional depth. It's just words, that maybe the patterns or the rhythm of it imply what you feel that the end result should be. But what has become a habit for me over the past however many years of just trying to keep myself, protected or together or whatever, is to not write about anything that is about me. You write, it's almost like you write these dumb little fictional lines about something, and then you try to adhere the emotional intensity to those lines that seem to go hand in hand with whatever it is that you just haphazardly jotted down. And then at the end you're like, this is a fucking pantomime. It doesn't mean anything. And that's the difference between humans and AI, is it's like, if you want to just write some dumb story and pantomime it, sure, you can do that. Of course, it's easier emotionally because you don't have to dig in. But then where's the difference? Where's the difference between what you do and what a computer does? Because it's the same intent. And the option is to say, okay, well, what is it that you want to say? What is in your soul that needs to be sung right now? And I think really what the point of this record is break into that. And not in a way that it's like precious, like everybody's swimming upstream in a river of your semen or something. It's more like, if you're going to do this, like, what do you need to say? Say it. Face it. Look at it. Say it. And I'm like, I don't know what it is, though. And it's like, yeah, you fucking know. You're just afraid to say it. Well, if I'm so afraid to say it, why isn't it come naturally? Well, because there's lots in your life, man. It's lots in all of our lives. It's not an easy time. So in order to do the things that you need to do, it's not easy. So the last thing I'll say for this update is, I was talking to the merch company the other day, because before every record, for every band, if you didn't know, this is kind of what happens. Everybody's like, okay, well, when the release comes, what's the logo look like? What's the t-shirt going to look like? And so I sent off the logo, which I really think is cool. Travis Smith did it again, and it's really cool. And like the mountains and the mist. And then he was like, well, what is a power nerd? And another person in my team was like, I don't like the name. Like, power nerd implies like a nerdy thing. And then when we're going through art, they're just like, well, we should have glasses or something. And I was like, no, it's not what it is. So it's like, what is a power nerd? Oh, me. Yep. It's okay to be nerdy. It's okay if people want to use that as a disparaging type of, slur. Because, yeah, I really like science things. I really like the science of frequencies and making music and the physics of sound. I love that. And I love organizing things and the puzzles that go into, my system, and how do I make things efficient and tactile and ergonomic. I love that. A lot of times these things are just like, well, that's what nerds do. And I'm like, okay. And so with this record, I'm like, okay, so it's going to be nerdy like I am, but it's going to be fucking powerful. And the power doesn't come from being, it's not the bravado. The power comes from being able to face it. And that's how I'll end this one. This is a long one today, sorry. But then immediately upon delivering this, in 2 weeks, back to the Moth. And the Moth is like one of the swan songs, one of these 4 projects, Ruby Quaker, Axolotl, Power Nerd, Moth. It's almost like DTP Part 2 in a weird way. I don't know if I said anything this time, but I said a lot, so there's there's that. As always, I hope your project's going well. Thank you for the support. Sorry I'm not online anymore. I used to always be on Twitter and Instagram and everything, but it's just so fucking gross, man. It's like, and the habit is you open it up and you look at Instagram or whatever, and it's like there's so much desperation in it that it feels like even if I put up posts that are like, hey, this is what I'm doing now, I'm tracking bass today or tracking drums today, it's like the whole aesthetic of it all has changed to this like, look, please, please, someone look, please. Here's me doing something funny, ha. It's like so. And it sucks because, of course, that's the way that you're meant to promote your stuff now. But I figure that this is at least, here we go. Hey, look at me, hey. Anyway, I hope your project's going well. Things are great in many ways. I'm so grateful for all of this fucking weirdness. All of it. Being a human is like, man, it's so intense. So grateful for it, though. It's like, I love it. So if we're here, you might as well dig in, man. So I ask you to do the same. Dig in. Because this shit isn't getting easier. So, Power Nerd, baby. See you next week.